My name is Jacky Klein. I'm a publisher and a writer and a former curator. And in my work, I haven't until now actively dealt with Jewish cultural themes. I've been working more in the art world and particularly in art publishing. But I think a lot of my perspectives changed in the last few years from an experience of living in Israel before and during the war in Gaza. And that, among other things, has definitely shifted my perspective to start to be more interested in the Jewish cultural space and wanting to make some positive change there in the current climate, which has been a very difficult one. I got involved in the project, in the book Jewish Realities after October the 7th, through meeting one of the editors, Alexandra Klein. She moves back and forth between Germany and Israel, and we met in Tel Aviv a number of times actually, both of us working in the same cafe in a slightly grungy part of South Tel Aviv. I suppose my main ambition was to write about my experiences, particularly visually, of how the world in Tel Aviv, which is mostly where I was living, had changed so dramatically at the onset of the war. So the contribution I made is a text with images from my phone of things that I'd spotted, things that had stood out for me in the urban cityscape of Tel Aviv. I think imagery was so central on October the 7th and afterwards. And one thing that I found living through the war in Israel was that I really couldn't face those images, the images created on October the 7th by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad. I couldn't look at them, I didn't want to watch the videos, but there was no way that you could even for a split second forget that there was a war going on because of the visual imagery that was suddenly all over the place. Everything from images of the hostages in these, very well-designed red, black and white posters, to yellow ribbons which suddenly appeared everywhere. So wherever you turned, you're sitting on a bench or you're walking through the streets or you're in a shop, suddenly a bottle of shampoo says on it, "Bring them home now," printed onto the marketing material of the shampoo. Or I remember driving into a car park and I'd go to pay with my credit card and the message flashes up, "Bring them home now, we will defeat." You couldn't avoid it anywhere. I wanted to make some commentary on how that visual world had suddenly shifted so dramatically, and the war really was everywhere. I think October the 7th had an enormous life-changing impact on me, as for many, if not most, Jewish people around the world, as well as many others. And the experience specifically of living in Israel, I think, made that extra intense because we were living through the war with a young family. And also, of course, as a British person, I was following the news very closely, also in the UK, in America. And in a way, you felt there was this sort of double front of the actual war going on the ground and then the war of words going on in most of the Western world. And it really has changed my perspective on the urgency of some of these issues. Anti-Semitism has been dramatically on the rise in Britain, as in many other places. And there have been real examples, manifold examples of cancellations and boycotts across the art and cultural world. And for the first time, this is something that I felt I really wanted to help do something positive about. I see musicians or comedians having their gigs cancelled, or as is in the case with publishing in the UK, for example, a year ago, last October 2024, one of many petitions was put out there to boycott all Israeli publishers, agents, book festivals, and about 7,000 people signed that. That's just one example of the scale of the challenge, because there are really great voices in publishing, Jewish and Israeli voices, that really deserve to be heard. The very greatest books, fiction and non-fiction, which are really not getting the space right now. Not just those books which maybe more controversially are commenting on the current situation in Israel and Gaza and the Middle East, but even books that almost tangentially have something Jewish about them. It may be only that their author is Jewish. And I and another group of people in the UK and in the US are very concerned about that and want to try and do something to make a change there, essentially to elevate voices who are not being heard, writers who are suddenly being dropped quietly by their agents, or their books are not even getting presented, getting put in front of publishers to make a decision on them. And we want to try and amplify some of those voices and give more space, more airtime to them. I'm working with a small group of people to try and set up a new publishing house which will help to pick up some of these fantastic projects by Jewish and Israeli writers, among others. I mean, I think what has really shocked me is this rise in anti-Semitism. I'm someone who grew up in London in the 1980s and 90s, where there were occasional flickers of anti-Semitism. I have to say almost nothing that I experienced personally, but it was a much more liberal, tolerant moment culturally. So it has been a shock to see the rise in anti-Semitism, particularly across the industries that I've worked in, the museum world, arts, culture. There was a report done just this summer, 2025, that found that anti-Semitism in the UK is rife across the arts and education, and also just as worryingly, if not more so, across the National Health Service and policing. So these are real issues now. And while I had an awareness of them before, of course, from my own family history, it was never something that I felt I needed to step up and do something about, and I feel very differently about that now.